Hello from the Channel studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches. I'm Tenyola Oyetayo. On the programme this week, doctors in Gaza warn of a looming health crisis with overcrowded hospitals running short on essential medicines and fuel. Plus, some families of hostages held by Hamas are concerned that Israel's operation in Gaza could endanger their loved ones. Thousands of people in Gaza displaced from their homes are now seeking refuge in hospitals that are struggling to stay operational due to a lack of electricity. They are also taking shelter in schools and refugee camps with limited aid supplies. Doctors report that many people at these locations are already showing signs of diseases caused by overcrowding and poor sanitation.
Campsites like this one in the Gazan city of Khan Yunis now house some 1.4 million Palestinians who have fled Israeli bombardment. And now doctors are reporting patients are arriving with signs of disease caused by their close quarters and poor sanitation. With limited aid, including medicine, arriving into the enclave, a likely health crisis edges closer. Sojud Najm, her husband and 3 children share this tent with 4 other displaced families. They sleep on the ground without enough blankets to go around.
Inside the tent, it's hot during the midday sun. There are insects and flies. At night, it's cold, and there aren't enough blankets for everyone. There is sand right beneath us. The children are all sick, some coughing, some have runny noses, some have fevers at night. Where are our human rights?
Gaza's health ministry says over 3 weeks of Israeli air and artillery strikes have killed more than 8,300 people. Many of the victims are said to be children.
Nearly 70% of those reported killed are children and women. Save the Children reported yesterday that nearly 3,200 children were killed in Gaza in just 3 weeks. This surpasses the number of children killed annually across the world's conflict zones since 2019. This cannot be collateral damage.
The strikes began as retaliation for a lethal incursion by Hamas militants into Israel on October the 7th, where more than 1,400 people were killed and over 200 taken hostage. Though families hope these temporary shelters will provide some safety from bombs, health authorities say they are perfect for the spread of sickness.
People in Gaza are dying. They are not only dying from bombs and strike. Soon, many more will die from the consequences of siege imposed on the Gaza Strip. Basic services are crumbling. Medicine is running out. Food and water are running out. The streets of Gaza have started overflowing with sewage. Gaza is on the brink of a massive health hazard, as the risk of diseases are looming.
40 medical centres have had to suspend operations at a time when the bombardment and displacement are putting increased stress on the system. Doctors have also warned that critical equipment like incubators for newborns risk stopping with hospitals running out of fuel to power their generators.
We have a baby who was delivered at 26 weeks and he weighed 1.9 pounds. The mother was referred from the northern city in an ambulance after the house next to her was hit by a strike. The baby was placed on a ventilator for the first 5 days of his life. All the babies in here are underweight and need intensive care around the clock. We are only operating with 10 ventilators. We'll face a huge catastrophe if the electricity goes out. We'll lose all those in critical care within 5 minutes.
In Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis, only patients in need of critical surgery are being accepted.
We are only admitting injured people who need surgeries. There are no empty beds in the intensive care units now. In the current conditions we are facing, We can't receive any patients with internal or heart disease. We only admit surgical cases, so people who suffer from chronic diseases are facing an unknown fate.
The United Nations has called for continuous, unimpeded aid to be allowed to flow into the enclave, and aid agencies have warned that a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding.
Collective punishment is occurring through the choking off of water, food, fuel, and electricity. Fuel shortages forcing the closure of hospitals and bakeries. People forced into shelters in increasingly dire conditions. Overcrowded, with poor sanitation and unsafe drinking water, bringing forward the specter of disease outbreak. A humanitarian catastrophe unfolds for the 2.2 million people locked inside Gaza who are being collectively punished. Efforts must be made to bring this escalation to an immediate end. It is of utmost importance that all those with influence negotiate a way out of this protracted, disastrous situation. Peace, security, and justice will not be found down this current path. The cycle of vengeance and bloodshed needs to end.
Despite increasingly critical humanitarian shortages, the UN Security Council has failed to agree on a resolution to seek a lull in the fighting to deliver meaningful amounts of aid. The International Criminal Court's top prosecutor has warned that impeding relief supplies to Gaza's population may constitute a crime under the ICC's jurisdiction.
And I want to underline clearly to Israel that there must be discernible efforts without further delay to make sure civilians receive basic food, medicine, anesthetics, morphine. We hear reports of operations taking place without these basic medicines, as if we're in the Middle Ages. Too many are dying and too many are being injured. And it's alarming to see the bodies of young children that could be our own children being dragged, baked in dust. In this regard, I have to say that Israel has clear obligations in relation to its war with Hamas. Not just moral obligations, but legal obligations to comply with the laws of armed conflict.
Israeli officials have said that food, water and medicine have been coming in through the Egyptian border and that it expected the quantities to rise. However, aid agencies say the supplies are limited and do not correspond to the huge need on the ground.
As efforts to free Israeli hostages continue, loved ones have expressed alarm at the possibility Hamas captives will be harmed in Israel's intensifying bombardment of Gaza. Israel's major ground offensive has stirred more international appeals for civilians to be protected in the Gaza Strip.
We obviously...
Israel's leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, is coming under pressure over his handling of the Gaza conflict.
Bring them home! No! Bring them home! No! Bring them home!
Dozens of people attended a protest in Tel Aviv to call for the release of hostages taken by Hamas.
I'm not a political person. I'm not the one with the answers, but I do know this. No other country in the world would have 239 of their people being kept hostage and not do anything about it. You have to understand, this is not, soldiers, okay? There's a 9-month-old baby there. There's a grandmother, 87, in a wheelchair with dementia. So, no politics, just bring them home now. 24 days is way too long for these people to be kept in captivity.
In a video released on Monday showing 3 hostages, one of them criticized Benjamin Netanyahu for failing to protect Israeli citizens and failing to get them back home. Families of Israeli hostages have also voiced concerns that the ground operation by Israeli forces is putting their loved ones in the crossfire.
We're just hoping that Netanyahu and all the other politicians and the people that get this decision won't forget the hostages and will think about them before any decision that they are making. We know when we see that they are speaking about two goals for this operation. One is to bring all the hostages, and the second is to destroy Hamas. And as her boyfriend, I truly afraid that these two goals is like in conflict with each other. They cannot achieve together. I think that first the hostages should be free if it's by a deal to release all the Palestinian prisoners and to get all the hostages alive and safe.
Although the presence of the hostages in Gaza has complicated Israel forces' ground operation, the Israeli Prime Minister has rejected calls for a ceasefire, saying that those calling for one are in effect calling for Israel to surrender to terrorism.
Just as the United States would not agree to a ceasefire after the bombing of Pearl Harbor or after the terrorist attack of 9/11, Israel will not agree to a cessation of hostilities with Hamas after the horrific attacks of October 7th. Calls for a ceasefire are calls for Israel to surrender to Hamas, to surrender to terrorism, to surrender to barbarism. That will not happen. I hope and pray that civilized nations everywhere will back this fight, because Israel's fight is your fight. Because if Hamas and Iran's axis of evil win, you will be their next target. That's why Israel's victory will be your victory. But make no mistake, regardless of who stands with Israel, Israel will fight until this battle is won, and Israel will prevail.
According to Israeli authorities, at least 239 hostages were taken captive by Hamas gunmen during the October 7 attack, which killed at least 1,400 people. In tribute to those held captive, a minute of silence was held on Tuesday, and rows of empty beds were arranged outside of Jerusalem City Hall.
When I came here this morning and I saw all the beds, the empty beds here, I thought, where is my mommy? Where she slept this night? Is she have a blanket? Is she have a pillow? I don't know even if she is alive. I hope she is alive. I don't think they have an interest to kill her because they took her life. But I don't know how long a woman 84 years old can survive there. I don't know.
This is basically showing all of the kidnapped people, showing their beds, basically resembling them not being here. We hope the best, we hope that they come back safe, healthy, and we don't know the situation. My grandparents, we don't know if they have their medicine, we don't know if they have good care. They're both elderly, they're very old. They're both around 80 years old, and I don't know how they'll do over there. We don't know how they'll come back. We saw the ones who did came back, I think 4 people, and they just seem traumatized and seem like the entire world was taken from them. They seem thin, they seem unhealthy, and I just hope for the best for my grandparents.
The captives include many children and elderly people and range in age from 9 months to 85 years old. They are believed to be hidden in the Gaza Strip, possibly in a warren of tunnels Hamas has built in the region. When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, we'll take a closer look at how Brazilian Santas are kicking off the festive season with a demand for peace in a Father Christmas graduation ceremony. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. Hundreds of thousands of demonstrators in cities across Europe, the Middle East and Asia are showing support for Palestinian civilians amid the Hamas-Israel conflict. While there's been strong support and sympathy for Israel from Western governments and many citizens in response to the Hamas attacks, the Israeli response has also triggered anger.
Occupation, no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Israelis are terrorists.
This was London over the weekend as around 70,000 pro-Palestinian protesters gathered on the streets to call for an end to the violence.
We're calling for a ceasefire. This has been going on for 75 years now. It's time for Israel to stop oppressing the Palestinian people. You've seen the deaths. The death toll has risen. What are we? Nearly at 8,000 people now. Most of the civilians there are children and minors. The Western government is doing absolutely nothing. You know, these superpowers at play are not doing enough at the moment. This is why we're here.
You know, I want a ceasefire. I want peace for people of Gaza. You know, I've just over the last few days, a couple of weeks, I've just watched so many babies and children dying, and I can just see a genocide. It's a genocide, and I just want, I feel so helpless right now, and all I felt I could do was come here to demonstrate, to be with people who are in a similar place, just trying to raise my voice and have, just try and send a message out to people to, bring peace. My heart is actually breaking right now. I just feel such a loss.
The demonstration was organized by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, with supporters demanding the British government call for a ceasefire, and some even carrying effigies of dead babies.
The excuse of retaliation or self-defense, it just doesn't cut it anymore. It never did. It's been 75 years of illegal occupation, and it's not self-defense. That the occupation was not self-defense. Keeping people in what is essentially a concentration camp is not self-defense. It never has been.
If you wanted to fight someone, just go fight him face to face in a single combat. Don't involve the citizen there. The kids been targeted. The civilian have been targeted in their homes.
Palestine! Palestine!
Echoing Washington's stance, the British government has stopped short of calling for a ceasefire and instead advocates for humanitarian pauses to allow aid to reach people in Gaza. Protests also took place in Manchester, Glasgow, Belfast and other cities. There were also similar scenes in several cities across the United States.
It's just devastating to know that Israel continues to escalate its violence, its genocide against Palestinians in every way. But we know that the Palestinian people have been so resilient in the face of many invasions like this, and we hope that Palestine will continue to fight for their right to be free. We support Palestinians' rights to defend themselves from this ground invasion, and we call on the U.S. to demand an end to Israel's ground invasion and Israel's bombardment of Gaza.
Eric Adams, you can't hide! Eric Adams, you can't hide! You support genocide! You support genocide!
Supporters of Palestinians marched through the streets of New York calling for justice, while the Jewish community held a vigil for Israel. And this was the moment anti-war protesters on Tuesday repeatedly disrupted a congressional hearing on Capitol Hill focused on aid to both Israel and Ukraine. They denounced top US officials for backing what they called genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, while raising red-stained hands in the air.
Not shrinking back.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken was forced to pause as protesters interrupted.
If the witness will suspend, and I ask that everyone again respect this hearing.
I also hear very much the passions expressed in this room and outside this room. All of us are committed to the protection of civilian life. All of us know the suffering that is taking place as we speak. All of us are determined to see it end. But all of us know the imperative of standing up with our allies and partners when their security, when their democracies are threatened. That's what's happening now. We stand resolutely with them, even as we stand resolutely for the protection of innocent civilians.
In Canada, activists occupied the office of the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister to demand a ceasefire.
We're here to demand that the Canadian government call for an immediate ceasefire, for an end to the almost 16-year-long blockade of the Gaza Strip, and to end Canadian complicity with Israel. So a military embargo and economic sanctions on Israel.
The calls for a ceasefire around the world continue as an expansion of Israel's ground operations commence. Officials have called the operation a second phase of the conflict. Since the intensified operation began, Israeli airstrikes have hit more than 600 Hamas targets, including weapons depot and anti-tank missile launch sites.
And on a lighter note, as the countdown to Christmas begins, Brazil's freshly graduated Father Christmas are better prepared than anyone else for the festive season. Let's take a look.
These are the latest graduates of the Brazil School of Santa Claus. Founded in 1993, the school prepares its students for a job acting like Santa Claus in malls or at private events. Sporting a white beard and some with their name engraved on their belt, the Brazilian Santas caroled on a tramp journey through the Santa Teresa neighborhood, waving at passers-by. During the graduation ceremony, some Father Christmas remembered the Gaza Strip conflict and demanded peace in the world.
To all in Israel and the Gaza Strip, Father Christmas is very worried about your situation. We are here praying to God for an end to the war and for there to be peace.
We want peace for the whole world. And we have to achieve it, because peace must reign.
Every Santa Claus starts growing their beard in May or June using specific techniques, including coconut oil and special combs, just to get as close to looking as the real Santa Claus as possible. As the men were awarded their graduation diploma that qualifies them to work as official Santas, they were also given the golden key that symbolizes the beginning of the Christmas season.
And that's all for today's program. But remember, our top stories are always within reach on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Tenyola Oyetayo. Bye for now.